Okay, so welcome to Retech. It's covering the second part of the Timex Computer 2048, and it's a nice little machine which we established in the previous video, and I think it's got a few advantages over your standard ZX Spectrum, and I also think it's a little bit better unit. In fact, no, it's a lot better built than a ZX Spectrum. I'm trying to be kind to Sinclair's original machine, but this machine seems to be much more robust, nicer build quality, arguably nicer keyboard, and it's not a bad overall machine. It also has a few other features which we touched upon in the first video, but today I'm going to have a look at see how exactly compatible it is when you compare it to the original ZX Spectrum, and it's meant to be almost 100% compatible with the ZX Spectrum. Now the almost bit is a bit vague. Everywhere you look, every bit of research you do on this machine, it doesn't really give many reasons why it's not 100% compatible. A lot of them are because of the extended modes and the extra modes this machine has, but we're going to have a look and see what it's like to use using standard Sinclair ZX Spectrum 48K software. So let's have a look and let's see how it works. Now for this I'm not going to use an external tape recorder or even an emulator cassette recorder. I'm going to use a Div MMC, and the reason for that is because I know this is perfect on my other standard ZX Spectrum on the rubber keyed model, and it also works fine on the Plus, and it also works fine on just about every other machine of ZX Spectrum I have. So it's a good starting point and it's a good known quantity, which is why I'm starting with this here. And what I've done also is started off with a fresh memory card. So that means that there's no corruption, no possibility of anything being corrupt, not installed properly, not copied properly, and so on. And it's just going to be a basic setup with a handful of picked ZX Spectrum games to see how they work. Now, anybody who's used one of these before knows they're pretty reliable. And you also know that you get a little bit of built-in software with it as well. So if we have a look at the screen, and what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the main menu, and we're going to start off with a few demos. Now the first thing you notice is that the up and down arrow keys are different. They've kind of swapped it around. So if I want to go down the screen, I've got to use the right arrow key, which is a little weird, but you know, it does work. So right arrow key to the bottom, then I have to use 7 to scroll up. If I use 6, nothing happens, and 5, it goes up again. So to the bottom, and then all you do is you pick your file or whatever you need to pick. So I'm going to go up to demos, and I'm going to pick a demo from here. I've got some 128K demos in, which comes with the memory card, but I'm just going to pick something I know works. So if I go to demo 1, or I go to 2, see, I mean these all work. These are demoing what you could do with a beeper speaker, and these are all fine. So if I reset and I go back to another demo, and the machine starts to draw out the demo, which is fine. It's doing a little graphical demo and it works the way it should do. Okay, so it's not a bad little demonstration of what the ZX Spectrum can kind of produce when pushed a little bit. And graphically it works really well. So if we go back to another one of the demos now, and as you can see, this again works really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flick through a few of the other demos and other games that are on here and programs. Okay, and as you can see, this one works a treat as well. So everything seems to be working the way it should be. Now so far there are no real compatibility issues with anything. And then we come to another demo which runs really well on a standard plus but fails to run. It fails to run on this machine and it just sits there hanging. So it seems that there may be a couple of tricks that is being used on an original ZX Spectrum ROM that this one doesn't know about, or there's a memory register somewhere that it's trying to access which doesn't quite work on this machine. So we have a little bit of an issue with maybe one out of all of the demo programs that we have. So at the end of the day, on demonstrations it seems to be about sort of 90% there, so it's not a bad hit rate. But let's see how we get on with some of the games as well, because that's what a lot of people are going to use. So we're going to do a fresh start to try out some games, so there's nothing in memory hanging about that could corrupt it. So let's have a look. So let's start off with a bit of a classic, and one I kind of use as a benchmark for the 48K Spectrum, which is Monty on the Run. And immediately, if you look at, you can hear me pressing all of the keys on the keyboard. So this one only works on keys 6 and 7 and 9 and 0 to jump. That's the only keys that work on it. It's like it's trying to emulate a version of a joystick. But I mean, it's not the end of the world. It will run, and it will run quite well. And it sounds and looks and feels exactly like a standard ZX Spectrum should. In fact, you'd be hard pushed to notice any difference. The game looks, feels and works the same. So the keyboard mapping is different. It only works on 6, 7 and 9, which is 6 is your down arrow, 7 is your up arrow, and that's how this one works. It doesn't seem to correspond to your standard ZX key system on your original Spectrum, but it's not at the end of the world. It does work, and it's not something you couldn't really get used to. I'm also not so sure if it doesn't slow down in places, but I haven't really played it enough to see if there's any difference in slowdown, because even the original Spectrum now and again had a tiny bit of slowdown on certain screens. But for all kind of outward appearance and all the way it plays like a standard 48K Spectrum. So we're going to do a reset, and we're going to then try another game. It's quite an early game. And this one's a little bit on the kind of jerky side, but I'm not so sure that it was originally like that. It seems to be fine. It's not a very good graphical game to have a look at, but it does run. It runs this It's not brilliant, but it does run it. So we'll try something that's a little bit more recognisable. This one again is using the same key combinations of 6, 7 and 0 to jump. Which is quite good because it works really well. And it's a little hard to play one-handed, but it works. And you wouldn't know any difference, but the intro screen's a bit weird. Again, that's probably not down to the computer itself, more down to this version of the game. So again, Set Willy runs just like any other Spectrum. Okay, this is, as you can know, it's Set Willy, but again it's slightly crashed. The intro screen's slightly crashed. Yep, this one works fine and it works the way it should do, and again it uses more of a standard Spectrum key mapping, so it's not emulating a kind of the keys that we used on some joysticks. So this one's a little closer to the original ZX Spectrum. Okay, so now we'll try Lemmings by DMA Design. Okay, and it's Lemmings and it runs the way it should do, so not really have a problem with this. So this works really well. So out of all of the games, there are a few minor glitches on some of the intro screens. So I'm guessing the graphics modes are just ever so slightly different, but when it goes into gameplay, most of the games are using standard resolution, and this one seems to work fine, and most of them work really well. But then you get this game. It's a kind of a classic British, I'd say, game, but it doesn't work on this machine at all. It locks up, it crashes, so again, there's some part of the coding that this machine doesn't like. And this seems to be a running theme. It seems to be a theme through all of the games. It's not 99% compatible. It's almost certainly not 90% compatible. I say this machine was more like 80% compatible to a standard ZX Spectrum, and this time it's locked up solid. The only option is to turn the machine off and to turn it back on again. And it's nothing to do with the machine. It's nothing to say that it's a bad machine. It's not saying that it's a machine you shouldn't think about keeping, because large chunk of the library is going to work, such as, here we go, Monty. And if you can run most of the iconic bits of software on this machine and most of the programs on this machine, then it makes it a worthwhile addition, and it's a lot better than the Timex Sinclair 2068, which is not really compatible at all. Now you can see the computer here. It's, as I said, it's a nice little machine. I'm quite happy I've got it. And you can see there's a emulated cassette drive on the top. And you'd be surprised to learn that this doesn't work at all with this machine. It doesn't work in any way. The only real way of getting reliable data into this machine is with one of these, a DivMMC, your standard emulated cassette drive, which again uses SD cards. Doesn't work at all. You can't get any software to load on it, and yet this will work with everything. It will work with any machine that I've got, from the 48K right through to the +2, +2A and so on. And it has no problems whatsoever, and in fact these are probably one of the most reliable ways of getting software into a Sinclair Spectrum. But on your Timex computer it's not an option, and when I did get it to work it was hit and miss. It would work, then it wouldn't, then it would work, and then it would just give up altogether. And it wasn't on the same title, it was on various titles and so on, where the Div MMC works really well with this machine every time, and it's a standard Div MMC, and a lot of people will recognize it who maybe have one for their Spectrum, because it's just, you know, a Byte Delight Div MMC, and this is a Pro Mini, and it works really well. I mean, it works really, really well, and I haven't really had any issues with it whatsoever, and it's a nice piece of kit. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to get one of these machines, you're going to have to almost certainly invest in one of these, a Div MMC, and then you're probably going to have to copy everything that you have on one of these emulated cassette drives if you've already got a ZX Spectrum, and copy it onto here, because you're going to have problems. Looking at the specs on both machines, I do think the timing is slightly different on this machine, but that's something I'm really going to have to look into, because on a cursory glance I think the timing's out. Out's probably the wrong word, different is probably the better word, but it's not massively out, and it's not massively different to cause that many issues with a huge amount of software. Now, it's probably in the same vein as the Dragon 32, where they changed the CPUs ever so slightly, and it stopped being able to be overclocked, which some games relied on, so it would lock up and crash. Now, I'm not saying that these are overclocked, but what I'm saying is there's slight differences, very minor differences, that stop some software from working. But overall, it's a nice machine. Now, hardware. Now, this is a different one. Does the hardware work with one of these? Well, obviously, hardware designed for the original ZX Spectrum works. It works fine. All the data lines, all the power lines are all the same. They do work, they're compatible, and they work with most pieces of hardware. Now, DK-Tronic's joystick interface, well, there's not really any point, because on the side of this machine you have a joystick port anyway. So really this is more for your standard Spectrum and Spectrum Plus, not for your later plus 2, plus 2A and plus 3, etc. Printers work. Your ZX printer will work. Your Timex Sinclair printer or Alphacom will work. Not every piece of hardware is going to work on this, so because of the same reasons that every piece of software doesn't work on this, and that's down to its ROM being slightly different on this machine. But it's compatible enough for most people to be happy to run most of the hardware and most of the software on this machine, and for that point of view it's a good clone. And I use that very loosely because it was an official computer licensed, but it's still been tweaked and adapted, which kind of makes it a clone. Again, I like this machine, so I'm quite happy that it runs even some of the software, let alone some of the more iconic software. Now, one of the biggest questions is, would I trade it for a Sinclair Spectrum? That's a hard question to ask, because I was kind of brought up on the old rubber keyed Spectrum, and it's kind of a bit more of a nostalgia route really, and it's probably going to be the same for a lot of people, but I wouldn't be sad to have that, and I wouldn't be disappointed to have that. And if I had one of these first, I would have probably gone no to that question if I'd had a Timex 2048 before a original ZX Spectrum, because the look, the feel and the quality is better on the 2048. The nostalgic route is probably better if you're in the UK on the ZX Spectrum, the original Spectrum 16 and 48K. So no, I wouldn't particularly trade it for a Spectrum 48, but at the same time I wouldn't not like to be without this machine, because of the two I find this a nicer machine to use. But that's my own personal opinion, and I'm sure everybody watching this will have a different opinion. Or maybe this was their first nostalgic computer and this is their first entry into computers, and this holds more sway than the rubber keyed Spectrum. You know, it's kind of horses for courses, but I like this machine. So that's the second part to your Timex 2048. There may be a third, because through making this video I kind of got thinking about the actual way this was produced, the timing of the circuitry and so on, so I might dissect the actual machine yet on another video, but that might be a bit further down the line, because that's probably going to be a very technical video and it's probably going to take a lot of time to map out the differences. But you know, that's probably a little bit of a project for a later date. But the Timex 2048 is around about 80% compatible, and it's not just the games and the programs you've seen on this video, it's also a list of about 103 different packages and programs that I've tried on here, and it's working out to be roughly the same ratio. It's looking at a compatibility of about 80%. Now that's not a bad hit rate. It probably would have put people off in the UK at the time getting hold of one of these because of its kind of 20% difference in the software that it runs. It was probably slightly more, but it's not going to put me off actually this machine itself, because I quite like it, and it's not going to put me off using this machine going forward, because again I quite like the machine. Now, as I said there, I wouldn't particularly trade this for an original ZX Spectrum, because the original one holds a little bit more nostalgia, for me anyway, but whereas this probably holds a lot of nostalgia for other people for the same reasons. But I'd say if you did buy one of these and you did find one of these and you've got one in the UK or any other country and you want to use classic software on this, this is the only way to go. A div MMC, which is directly linked to its data bus, because the emulated cassette or the emulated SD drive doesn't particularly work very well on one of these. The standard cassette recorder does, but you've got to have a lot of volume, and it's kind of, why use a cassette recorder when you have SD drives now and something that can virtually load the software instantly? And that does make a difference. That shoves the data into the machine very, very quickly, as you saw. But I'm going to do a little bit more on this machine. I'm going to restore it. I'm going to get a new faceplate. I'm also going to try and get a couple of the keycaps replaced if I can, and generally make it into like an A1 condition machine again. I'm not going to take away the kind of patina of the years from the machine. I'm just going to replace what's necessary, because you can over restore these machines and they have to show a little bit of wear and tear because of their age. I think that's all part of the character. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope if you do think about buying one of these, it's worth buying, and it's worth just fiddling about with the software and finding the odd one or two that doesn't run. So if you like this episode, please subscribe. There's more coming soon, and I hope to see you again on this channel very shortly. So until then, take care of yourselves guys, and I'll see you soon.